Hello everybody and welcome to this Juniper Research Roundtable event titled 5G, Blockchain and the IoT, What's Next for Roaming Clearing Services? My name is Scarlett Woodford and I will be your host for this webinar. Firstly, allow me to briefly provide an overview of our agenda. I will begin with some introductions to myself and my esteemed guest speakers. I will then move on to key findings from our recent data and financial clearing report. And then we will progress onto the panel discussion. In terms of introductions, I'll begin with myself. My name is Scarlett Woodford and I'm a senior analyst at Juniper Research with a specialism in the telecommunications market. Within the past 12 months, I've authored research reports on a variety of topics, including 5G roaming and data and financial clearing. Today, I am joined by three guest speakers, Basu from Mobileum, Reiffer from TOMIA, and Nicole Pettibon from TNS. I will now briefly introduce each one of our speakers in turn. Firstly, we have Basu from Mobileum. Basu is a results-driven, pragmatic business and tech leader with over 25 years of solid experience in technology, specialising in telecom and fintech. Deep is the SVP of Roaming Solutions for Mobileum, and he has been assuming different roles within Mobileum for the past 15+ years, since it was founded as Roamware. Deep previously has worked for SoftPlus, Infogame, and Oracle. Next, we have Reiffer from TOMIA. Reiffer is VP of Clearing and Global Partnerships at TOMIA, responsible for the company's clearing business line and company-wide partnership relationships. He is heavily involved in the move evolution of TOMIA solutions from clearing to BCE, as well as looking further afield into the opportunities that 5G standalone will bring. With over 30 years of experience in global roles, Guy's background in telecommunications ranges from BSS/OSS through IP applications to transport networks across mobile, fixed and content providers. And lastly, we have Nicole Pettibon from TNS. Nicole joined TNS in 2014 as Senior Product Manager for its communications market business. With over 20 years' experience in roaming, she is focused on billing and clearing from both an operator and a vendor side. She has participated in multiple GSMA industry groups, helping to define and progress the GSM standards for wholesale billing. Nicole is skilled in establishing valuable business relationships, leading cross-functional and cross-cultural organisations, and maximising performance and profitability. Before I continue, I'd like to remind you that if you have any questions, these can be submitted to us, myself and the guest speakers, via the chat box. We will then aim to answer as many as we can at the end of the webinar. I'd now like to present to you some key findings from our recent data and financial clearing report. We forecast that total operator billed roaming revenue will reach $2.1 billion by 2026. And this is predominantly due to leakage caused by misidentification of roaming data traffic. This represents an absolute growth of more than 300%. Predominantly, this is due to the recovery of travel following COVID-19 and the adoption of 5G. We believe that operator support for the BCE protocol is really key to minimising this loss due to revenue leakage. The BCE being an end-to-end standard designed to introduce a new level of flexibility to charging and settlement models. We believe that the BCE protocol will have four main benefits within the context of roaming clearing. The first of this being enhanced traffic filtering. That is, the protocol will make it easier to distinguish between 4G and 5G data traffic. Whilst early trials of the BCE have focused on 2G and 3G, it's important to note that the process is constantly being evolved with the view to cover new network technologies such as 4G and 5G. The BCE protocol will also support flexible timescales, as whilst existing charging models require operators to exchange traffic data records on a daily basis. Using the BCE, operators can exchange aggregated data over extended time periods. This means that operators will be able to form bespoke agreements with their roaming partners that are most beneficial to their individual use cases and needs. The BCE protocol will also improve efficiency, enabling operators to streamline processes, reduce the amount of manual work involved, and reduce the costs associated with resolving these billing disputes. It will also enable the monetization of new use cases such as IoT. As it's important to note that the majority of IoT devices and sensors generate such small amounts of data that they simply fail to be captured using TAP files. Most charging models are based on traffic, and even if a minimal fee is applied per megabyte of data, these IoT connections will still be charged at a zero rate. We firmly believe that operators need to be able to charge based on the number of devices or something similar. The adoption of AI is key to distinguishing consumer connections from IoT connections using previously observed data based on roaming behaviours. The COVID-19 pandemic really highlighted the importance of monetizing IoT traffic. As whilst the number of roaming subscribers fell, operators were still experiencing roaming traffic on their networks, and this was predominantly due to IoT devices. Although it's important to note that the delays in implementing the BCE have not solely been due to the pandemic, and whilst it's true that operators were more preoccupied with consolidating their core services and innovating new technologies, the BCE is going to take a while to implement, as these new telecommunications processes can take up to a decade to implement fully. We forecast that the total number of 5G roaming connections will increase from 5 million in 2021 to over 200 million by 2026. 5G rollouts will accelerate and international travel will recover after the impact of the pandemic. For this reason, we believe that operators need to continue their investment in 5G standalone networks, as the low latency and high-speed data downloads will be key to supporting IoT use cases. There will also be demand from the consumer sector, as the market is quickly approaching a critical mass of 5G-enabled consumer devices. The users of these devices will want to be able to connect to 5G services whilst abroad, driving further demand. 5G will inevitably lead to an increased demand for data when roaming, and therefore operators will be able to differentiate themselves by offering 5G roaming agreements. Again, the use of machine learning in roaming analytics tools will be key to assess roaming behaviour and data usage, ensuring efficient monetization. Clearing processes will become much more complex as the increase for data when roaming increases, and this is one of the reasons why operators need to adopt the BCE protocol. Combining BCE with AI-enabled roaming analytics is the ideal, as being able to separate traffic on the basis of network connectivity is essential. Operators will then be able to charge roaming partners based on factors such as latency and download speed, enabling operators to maximise overall 5G roaming revenue. I'd now like to move on to our panel discussion and invite our guest speakers to turn on their webcams. So my guest speakers, I'd now like to begin discussions on the roaming market and the future of the key technologies previously mentioned. We'll begin with Nicole Pettibon answering the first question. Nicole, how do you see the roaming clearing market evolving over the next 5 years?
Thanks, Scarlett. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how roaming progresses in the next 5 years. I already feel like in the last year, we've seen a lot of changes in roaming with the 3G turndowns. And as we continue growing 5G now with these 3G turndowns, I think we're going to start seeing a lot different players in the marketplace. You're just not going to have just traditional MNO operators. Instead, you're going to have people like Facebook and Google that are going to be entering these marketplaces. I think it's also going to be really interesting to see how quickly people can adopt BCE. Now that 3G turndown has happened, there really is no need to have TAP anymore for commercial settlement, or sorry, for billing your end subscribers. I mean, you still need it for settlement, but you can actually move to the BCE protocol now. So I think it's going to be really great just to see how everything continues to progress, and also if these new players in the marketplace are able to adopt 5G and these BCE protocols maybe a little bit quicker because they don't have these legacy processes in place.
Thank you, Nicole. Guy, what are your thoughts on that question, how the roaming market will evolve?
So I think in the next 5 years, I mean, obviously 5G is coming on stream. People are looking at roaming agreements in 5GSA towards the end of this year, the pioneers. And the only way of billing or wholesale billing for 5GSA is the BCE product. So that will become, or 5G will drag BCE into the market over the next 5 years. I don't think it will be dominant for the first 3, but probably there'll be a hybrid market between BCE and clearing over the next 5 years. I think the other thing that's going to change is, as you said, during the pandemic, we really saw as the roamers drained away, how many machines were actually roaming. And in many markets, it was many millions of devices. We saw in one operator, 6 million devices were still there as the people vanished. And it was almost like the pond drained and you could see all the fish in there. So, and we expect that trend to continue to grow significantly. And as you said, people aren't really inbound. People aren't getting any benefit from those devices because they're tending not to consume data. So we're seeing now people negotiating roaming agreements on a per device type basis, on a per company basis, on a segment basis. So one thing that's going to become dominant in the next 5 years is the number of deals that operators have to deal with, to a point where an operator today probably has 2 or 3 agreements with another operator. That probably 500 operators that they deal with. That will easily go to 5,000 deals that they have to deal with, and that means that the wholesale process must be automated end to end to be able to manage that with the same amount of people.
Thank you, Guy. Deep, do you have any thoughts to share on this question?
I think what Guy said is a perfect segue. Very aligned with what he said. The volume of the complexity, the multi-dimensional matrix that's inevitably going to happen between customer segments, devices, services, volumes of usage. It's going to just completely change the whole fabric of how we deal with clearing and other wholesale processes really at large. So the role of the data that we get back from the systems, the networks, the usage patterns, I think that's got to be important. I think the role for technology in automating some of these things, stuff like analytics, stuff like machine learning based modeling, all that is going to kind of beginning to creep into what has traditionally been a very, very people oriented and dare I say spreadsheet oriented and kind of old world process. I think there's a lot of cognizance amongst operators that that world is changing dramatically. So yes, I see a big role for new tech, new approaches to solving these problems as the market evolves. So I'm kind of going a step ahead of, and I know you're going to deal with some of these questions as we go on. But the complexity of different kind of discount agreements, nth decimal place where some usage is happening, those things are really, really problematic that we need to kind of grapple with and lay to bed.
Thank you very much. So that leads us on next to our next question. What potential disruptive impact will the BCE protocol have on the market? Will there still be a role for tap processes once the BCE protocol is more widely adopted? And I'd like to direct that one to Guy, if I may.
Sure. People always expect, let me say when I start this question, people always expect me to defend the clearinghouse as I'm a clearinghouse provider. It's not the case. We see BCE as a wonderful opportunity, and ultimately BCE will take over from TAP, there's no doubt about it. The disruptive thing of BCE, when BCE started, everyone talked about, well, there were going to be less billing records going from A to B, and that was a good thing. It's not really what BCE is about at all. BCE, from my point of view, and the disruption it provides, is it allows you a very, very flexible way to manage deals or to rate deals. So it means that you're no longer restricted between yourself and your partner into the kind of deals that you can negotiate. You can have a deal that says, I'm going to have 100,000 devices and you can use 10 gig, and after that it's going to be 5 cents. Traditionally, it's quite difficult to do that kind of deal. in TAP. You have to do all post-processing. So BCE makes that much simpler to do, and it kind of lets you leap on to these new types of deals, which will be essential when you get into 5G and into the machine-to-machine. And even today, when I look at what we're doing, we're actually, taking the rating capabilities of BCE and implementing them now to monetize the IoT. So it's here now, that piece, and that's the major piece as far as I'm concerned. There's another big difference is that because all the records are home routed now, traditionally TAP was set up because you couldn't see what was happening in the visited network, but now you can see everything because all the records are home routed. So actually everything's gone into reverse and the records are being sent to us if we're doing the BCE from the home network. So that's changing things a little bit, and it's making operators think about whether they want to have the BCE in the cloud or whether they want it locally in their cloud, and that's a big change compared with the clearing scenario. So there are two things. I think from a TAP perspective, it's not going away in the next 5 years, but it will tail as 5G and machine-to-machine take hold. One thing is that what operators want is one deal management platform that sits above both the TAP processes and the BCE processes. So they don't have, they just don't want complexity. They're not going to get any more people to manage this. So they have to simplify their processes.
Thank you so much, Guy. Deep, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Sure. I think Guy talked about the whole tailing off the whole, the process of replacing one with the other, and that clearly is obviously a natural progression. The way systems need to handle that kind of parallelism, if you will, is going to create some disruption, I think, in IT. We know there are natural challenges within operator environments and kind of handling systemic changes, process changes, people, training, kind of all of these things. I think, procedurally, there's a bunch of things, there are a bunch of kind of quote unquote challenges that are natural, but I think operators will just have to think through and plan for some of these things. And again, different services will move at different times. I think data with the obvious explosion of IoT devices is a natural first candidate, obviously, for BCE, while voice and SMS will slowly transition over. So some of these things are going to be kind of, they just need some thoughtful approach to handling the different speed of adoption, if you will. I think that's probably the key disruption element that I would think about. There's, of course, the positive side of the disruption that lets you monetize the opportunities much better and so on, but that's the positive element of it. So I'm just kind of putting the spin on the word, but in that disruption, in that seeming kind of fear of change, there is the opportunity that's waiting to be monetized. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Nicole, have you got any thoughts to add?
Yes, I agree with everything that the panelists have already said about, kind of what will be happening with TAP and kind of the disruptive impact. I think just one thing, I think TAP will still exist for a while because, unfortunately, we still have HURs and everyone still hasn't migrated to near trade after all of these years. So I think TAP still will exist. I really hope that by doing these type of panel sessions, we can explain the value of BCE. I did hear just yesterday that some people are trying to use TAP for BCE, which I'm like, no, please tell me that's not happening. But I do think BCE is just going to be so important. It's going to give all the mobile network operators in the world more flexibility. When you start looking at 5G slices and be able to charge differently for each of those slices, by having visibility into the different, qualities and stuff that you're giving to those different slices, it's only going to be possible through BCE. So I think we're just going to see a lot more flexibility. And I really think that what's going to be the most disruptive thing is just seeing these amazing charging models that can be done and that you can charge in different increments and different intervals. And it's going to be really fun just to see how people can use that to their advantage.
Thank you very much, Nicole. So my next question is, what are the major benefits that the BCE protocol really offers over and above TAP files? I'd like to direct that question to Deep as the first respondent.
Sure. So I think, again, I'll take off from where Nicole left off. The flexibility in the charging models, the decoupling, if you will, of wholesale and the retail side of the house, the ability to respond much better to the complexity that's inevitably going to happen in a more complex value chain that's going to drive the retail billing, right? Enterprises, their customers, and so on and so forth. That's going to place a huge load on the operator's retail billing process. It's a good thing that I think as they depend on home-driven records to kind of drive the retail side without having to be coupled directly to the wholesale side, that's going to be a transformational benefit. Obviously, the reduction I think that's going to come in vendor system costs and so on is going to be slightly back and loaded. Inevitably, there's the initial investments, but over time the benefits will begin to show up. Faster dispute handling is another benefit that immediately comes to mind, obviously. And I think another one that doesn't get talked about enough is regulation around data privacy, subscriber data management. That's going to be served well by adoption of BCE because you're not transferring subscriber data, for example, right? So that's an evolving field, but I think in its own way, BCE is going to be kind of supporting, if you will, operators' needs to comply with what is obviously a constantly evolving field. So yeah, those are some of the key things that come to mind right away.
Thank you. And Nicole, what are the main benefits of the BCE protocol from your perspective?
I think the first thing is making sure that everyone knows that it's not, simple. Doing BCE is definitely going to be more complex. But I think one of the main benefits of having this more complex thing is what I've already mentioned about having more flexible charging. That's especially important when you start looking at IoT and M10 devices. I think that, as you mentioned in your initial slide, that a lot of these devices don't have a lot of usage and they weren't detected in the network previously. So we'll allow you to be able to identify those M10 and IoT devices and be able to charge for those. And it's really important because I think a lot of us have talked about those scenarios that there's the shipping container that was going through the Panama Canal, and all of a sudden when it did attach, it caused so much network congestion. So by allowing, and there was really no way that the local operators could even charge for that because it was just network attaches versus actual billable records that were going back and forth. But now with BCE, that those type of sessions will be visible, and will, using BCE will allow people to charge for those type of situations.
Thank you. Guy, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, the BCE, let's face it, is a modernization of what TAP was. TAP was designed in, I think, the 90s. And it does bring things up to date. It gives us this flexible charging model without limits, really. It is still an evolving protocol. I mean, for example, you can't put traditional voice into BCE at the moment. And so the protocol will continue to evolve over the next few years. There's going to be a major release mid next year. A lot of discussion about what's going into that at the moment. And also a lot of discussion around, how do you deal with things like group deals in BCE? Do you try and deal with that within the protocol, or do you continue to deal with that in the deal management platforms? Probably the latter, I think. In terms of other benefits, I mean, the dispute management is on call rather than, you're not transferring all the records all the time. Only if there's a dispute will you then say, okay, now we pull up all of the detailed records, you request those from both sides, and then you put the detail together. So it's a much lighter weight process, but when you go into a dispute, then actually there's still the same amount of work, or quite a lot of work. It's difficult to automate all of that work. You can do the simple comparisons and narrow down where the problem is, but actually after that, you tend to get into a more complex scenario. So it is a lot of benefits. It's obviously got the benefit that it's the only protocol for 5GSA. So, and I really hope, like one of you said, I hope people aren't going to try and use TAP for 5GSA, because that would really be a disaster. So it has that benefit that it is the future, and there's a firm cutoff date for it. It's not, TAP is not being evolved anymore. So we're now jumping into this new area, and we have to add the pieces that are needed for BCE.
Thank you. And with that in mind and the future of 5G connectivity, how do you think that 5G will impact existing data and financial clearing procedures? Nicole, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I think it's actually going to be really different. I think for the first time in many years, we're going to see a shift in what data and financial clearinghouses look like. How I see when people start to implement BC, everyone's going to have a different flavor of it. You know, I see more a la carte services that operators are going to really be wanting. So some people may want just the record creation. Some people may want the clearinghouse to store the records. Some may want the records to be stored locally. So I think that the lines are going to become blurred. I think it's going to become blurred between SCH and DCH processes. I think you're going to see a lot of things kind of coming together, and it's not going to be like, here's your DCH service, here's your financial clearing service. I think a lot of it's just the clearing of records, whether it's financially or data, and there's not going to be as much processing happening on a day-to-day basis of records because a lot of it's going to be more done on the bulk side. I think it's just going to be interesting to see how everyone handles the storage. I think when we start talking about 5G, M2M, IoT devices, we all know even though there's not a lot of usage, there could be a lot of records. And when you go to BCE, there's going to be, with the dispute processes have been mentioned, you may need to store those records for a longer amount of time. So who's going to store those records? How long are they going to be stored if you're only settling once per year? So I think it's definitely going to be a huge shift, but I think it's a really positive one.
Lovely, thank you, Nicole. Guy, I'd like to direct this question next to you. What are your thoughts? Obviously, we've touched upon it briefly in the last section. Would you like to expand on your position?
So as I said, 5G SA is BCE. The interesting thing is, as a clearinghouse is basically a centralized resource sitting between all the operators, with a managed service team sitting on top of it, making sure all the processes, work and flow through the system. And when you look at BCE, actually the same is true. You need to make sure that you can manage disputes, that all the data is being processed correctly, that you can be an intermediary between all the different parties. So from that perspective, actually, not so much changes from a sort of managed service point of view as far as we can see. In terms of how the data is managed, it's completely upside down, as I said, because we receive the records all from the home, apart from the BCE, once a month invoice, whatever. So that whole piece changes. I think the other piece that's interesting from the 5G, as we said before, is there's multiple deal types going to be between two partners that are going to have to be managed. And as you bring in things like network slicing, those will get more complex again. They're the main things, I think.
Thank you, Guy. Deep, would you like to add your thoughts here?
I think Guy covered it well. Network slicing is one thing that comes to mind right away, right? The complexities around that. The impacts of that obviously on the entire wholesale process at large, clearing being one element of it. That's going to be interesting how it plays out more as we get towards SA. So we have a little time for operators. I think one of the points, I think Nicole made that earlier, the constant education and thinking around it is going to be very important. Else, the adoption is going to be so staccato, it is going to become a problem over time. But I think, in terms of 5G, aside from that, managing the balance between looking at usage level data versus being able to work with just the consolidated, I think that's going to be important as well, because I see as you kind of move from the old world to which we've been habituated for like the better part of the last 2.5 decades to this new world, that's going to be a curve of disruption that I think is going to be a little problematic, and that's obviously 5G is at the center of what causes it. But aside from that, it's once we kind of settle down into the flow of things, it should be much smoother, and then the benefits will begin to accrue, and light at the end of the tunnel, as they say, proverbially.
Thank you very much. So taking a step back, we've mentioned, obviously items such as 5G and the implications of the BCE protocol. But on a sort of overview level, how can network operators best monetize IoT roaming traffic? Guy, would you like to add anything on this one?
Yeah, we've done a lot of work on this over the last few years. I think originally most of the work was to talk with operators and even just to make them realise there was a problem or an opportunity, depending on which way you look at it. The first step of this is to detect or show an operator, or for the operator to show themselves what's going on in their networks. Many operators don't realise how many devices are in the network, and that actually is quite a dangerous situation. If you think about the scenario we were just talking about, where you've got the containers landing and putting a strain on the signaling network, but actually generating no revenue, it's not a good situation for an operator to be in. So first step we always take is to actually look at, okay, how many devices do you have? It's very easy if you have something called the IMEI, the machine identifier, in your records. If not, then we use machine learning to do the detection based on behaviors. And you know, you get some surprising results. I said in one operator, a tier one, we found 6 million devices and only 1.5 million people devices. In another operator, we found 7 out of 8 of the devices were machines. In most networks, it's at least 50-50. But of course, those devices are there all the time. They're not on holiday. They're normally permanent roaming. And many of the the operators then try and figure out, okay, well, how do I define that I need to start charging this device differently? And that normally is around permanence. So anyway, the first thing is to detect them. The next thing is to negotiate a deal. And the third thing is actually the monetize bit, which is actually to be able to isolate the IMSIs which are coming from a particular partner. It's not always in an APN, you're not always nicely packaged, it's sometimes scattered. And to be able to then apply a rating model and charge those devices. And a lot of operators at the moment are having to do that manually because the TAP process is not set up for it and their financial process is not set up for it. So it's something where actually using the BCE engine, we're starting to automate that process. But if you can do that, then you can do what you were talking about, Scarlett, which is where you start to charge per device. You start to charge, you can give a bucket of usage, perhaps 10 gig, and then an amount per gig after that for if you're in the network for 80 out of 90 days. That would be a typical operator agreement that's starting to emerge. And the market is really, it's been a problem, I think, for 2 or 3 years. It's only now that operators are starting to implement. And we're also starting to see that people who are putting these devices out globally start to look for a quality agreement with their roaming partners. In other words, they're not hiding. They're saying, okay, yeah, you can charge me, but I want actually a service level agreement with you, which guarantees that I can meet what BMW needs of me or this solar panel company. So there's a need on both sides for actually a paid for quality SLA now to support machine to machine.
Brilliant, thank you, Guy. Deep, would you like to add your thoughts here?
Sure. I think at the confluence of IoT and 5G, there's this whole thing about enterprises, private wireless, and what happens to roaming between the public and the private world. That's another thing that is going to be evolving and emerging. I think that's it's going to create opportunities in terms of monetizing what clearly is going to be the next wave of roaming-related opportunities. So aside from what Guy talked about in access-based business models, the ability to discriminate and differentiate at level of devices, services, quality, SLAs, all of these are the early adoption of some of these elements are already in play. We see that in many of our tier one customers, singular laser focus, for example, on driving wholesale conversations more around quality, more around the complexity of different customer segments, and so on and so forth. So these are happening, and they're happening between a very small handful of operators that are really more evolved in their thinking. Not all necessarily large, but they're tier one in the way they think of some of these things. So again, private wireless devices, services, multiple striations. I think they're all opportunities waiting to be monetized by operators.
Deep. And Nicole, I'd like to offer you the opportunity to answer this question.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that the other panelists have already stated, but I think the most important thing is identification. You have to first be able to identify that usage, and you know, you may not easily be able to identify it. Maybe you have an IMEI, maybe you have an IMSI, but you need kind of the AI tools on top of it to be able to determine when IoT and M2M usage is happening on the network. And that's kind of step one of BCE. Like you can apply BCE, but if you don't know what kind of usage is happening, you don't know how to apply the rates. So I think all three of us have competing products that help identify M2M and IoT and different types of usage. So I think it's really important to take a look at those type of tools that are available and then use those tools to kind of say, what has been going on in my network? Look at your 2G and 3G usage if you haven't turned down those networks. Look at your LTE usage. So then you kind of have that ability once you get to 5G to start identifying those different streams of data.
Very much. And my last question is, what role will blockchain have on the future clearing market, if any? Deep, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Certainly. I think blockchain is actually poised for poised to play a very important role here. Again, BC is one level of technology evolution that's ongoing right now. Blockchain is an underlying enabling technology that's going to bring additional benefits, you know, and some of these, just off the top of my mind, some things that immediately come to mind are the near real-timeness of settlement of charges, right? The smart contracts, execution of dispute, the digital settlement, identity management, and generally speaking, I think blockchain at large, I mean, just going beyond clearing, has a role to play in the entire gamut of wholesale management, all the way from speeding up processes around document exchange, signatures, conclusion of deals, and so on and so forth. The ability to then kind of, hasten up the settlement and clearing process. So accuracy, speed, the usual benefits of blockchain, right? Accuracy, speed, the transparency around it. Those things definitely are set to transform, I think, the way we look at wholesale and clearing processes. So yes, I think blockchain definitely has a role to play. How quickly it will get there is a function of how operators think of managing different elements of this entire evolution, all the way from BCE to blockchain. They're kind of orthogonal. So I think a little bit of management of the entire IT stack, the way they think about it, that's going to be important. As you know, there are already initiatives that GSM has announced, e-business. There are other alternative initiatives out there. So connecting up all these initiatives, that's going to be important to really kind of give that the scale, the benefits to scale to the operators. So yes, definitely very hopeful about the role of blockchain and the benefits that blockchain can bring to operators, and indeed the larger ecosystem, right? It's not just about service providers. It is about getting, I think we're going to enter a new era where, and all three of us here and many other companies are going to inevitably partner and collaborate much better to bring the benefits to operators. It's one of those things about an ecosystem that we will see taking shape as a result of adoption of blockchain.
Thank you, Deep. Nicole, what's your perspective on the future of blockchain?
This is where I may kind of disagree with some of the other panelists. I feel like I don't see us moving to blockchain for these type of processes in the near future. I like blockchain. I think that there definitely is use cases that blockchain could be used in this type of environment. But I think as a vendor, a lot of our direction comes from the operators. And when I participated in the operator forums, I've noticed that they don't feel like blockchain is really equitable in this type of environment. It's not easy for like the tier 3 operators to be able to implement blockchain because it's more expensive. So I think it's going to be a huge shift to get people to go from TAC to BCE. And then I think it's just going to probably take, in my mind, over 5 years for people to even really get from going from BCE to blockchain. I think there's other applications that maybe blockchain could be applied to, maybe in the agreement front, but specifically for BCE, I just don't see it happening in the near future.
Thank you for sharing, Nicole. And Guy, what are your thoughts on this?
So I think it's a really interesting question. If you'd asked me 2 years ago, that was when we were at the peak of the hype cycle, if you like, for blockchain. And you know, we were certainly putting our partnerships in place and expecting the market to come up towards us, and it hasn't happened. And I think part of the reason for that is that many of the use cases can be done in another way, and it requires a mass adoption to really make it become useful, you know, in things like agreement management, for example. And it's very, very, very good what you can do in agreement management by locking together agreements on both sides. I mean, it really, really takes out a lot of the uncertainty, but we just don't feel the market moving there at the moment. I think what we do know is if the market goes there, that you have to be the DLT distributed ledger agnostic. You can't just be with one blockchain, in other words. And also anything that we do, you know, sitting across the market, will have to be agnostic to whether you're on chain or off chain. So in other words, all of our products will look like some kind of application plugged into the blockchain, but equally they will be able to work off chain as well. And I think that will be the same for all the vendors. I don't see that, you know, you're suddenly going to be in a place where you have, you know, one blockchain that everyone sits around. It just isn't equitable to say that that's going to happen. So, but you know, the benefits are there. It's just the market is not adopting them. It doesn't seem to be rushing towards them at the moment. Maybe because of COVID, maybe just because the benefit didn't sort of get above the line in terms of the business case. But we don't see it happening now, that's for sure.
And can I just ask, what do you think is the main reason for the market not rising to meet that demand? Do you think it's due to COVID, or are there other factors contributing?
Is that to me, Scarlett?
It was, sorry, just to carry on from your previous point.
Yeah, so as I say, I think COVID slowed everything down, and then another thing that slowed everything down is the 2G, 3G shutdown in the States. That's you know, every roaming department pretty much is trying to work out how they get quality service into the States at the moment, and so that's really focused their minds. And I think everyone is, you know, knows that in the in-tray they've got 5G SA to deal with, and Volte to make sure, you know, everything. And Volte is actually quite complex for the roaming team, so there's a lot going on in roaming at the moment. So I think this one sort of almost just fell off the tables at some point, and I think it will come back. I completely agree with Deep as well. I think, you know, logically it should be there, and I agree with Deep that it's not only about this wholesale process, it's about all wholesale processes. So what you might find is that, you know, as the telecom sphere kind of starts to use blockchain in different ways, more and more applications will be added onto that blockchain, and roaming being one, and the sort of different pieces of the roaming application. So I think it will be a slow burner, but I do believe if you looked at us in 10 years, it wouldn't make sense for us not to be using it.
Thank you very much. We've received some questions from the audience, so I'd like to pose these to all three of our panelists. So the first question is, what is the level of BCE adoption by tier 1 operators across the globe?
I'll take it, or someone else want to take it? I think certainly for our customers, all of our tier 1s have gone through pilots, trials, proof of concept, call them what you like. And the first applications for BCE are narrowband IoT and machine to machine. You know, and again, allowing the operators to have new deal types. So they're the two business cases which are getting through. And in parallel with that, we're seeing tier 1s get ready for 5G SA. The majority of those will be in the first half of 23. Some will be late 22. The real pioneers will be late 22.
Thank you very much. The next question we've had in regards to the COVID-19 pandemic. Clearly, the pandemic has had a significant impact on the roaming market, but how can operators best position themselves for recovery? I'd like to open it up to our panelists, if any of you have any.
I can go ahead and take that first. I think, it actually goes back to some of the things that we've been talking about. As you get out of, we have definitely seen roaming traffic increase. People are traveling again, so that's great. But I think what we did see during COVID is that we did see a huge drop in usage. And so we did definitely still see an increase in M10 and IoT devices. So that's definitely, I think, something important. If you have that downtime when roaming business isn't as busy, start using those tools to be able to look for the M10 IoT traffic and make sure your agreements are in place to be able to monetize that if needed.
Yeah, I agree, Nicole. I think it's 100% that there is unmonetized devices there. And I think getting that process in place now while things are not at full steam will allow you to monetize it as you go forward and make more and more money from that.
Yeah, just to add to what both Nicole and Guy said, I think the recovery is going to be very differently. It is turning out to be very differently shaped. You kind of need to double click a level below and realize that certain segments have started to roam. So there's the essential kind of act of traveling that creates roaming traffic. The kind of devices, Apple didn't really stop, Samsung didn't stop, new devices came about, 5G rollouts happened, the adoption, and these all-you-can-eat kind of data packs that have been in vogue for the last few years, they still continue. The question around monetization is going to be, okay, now I'm going to kind of discriminate and differentiate a little better, understand, segment my customers' usage, devices, services, and think about how we reimagine retail. I think that's important because we've talked about the potential of decoupling wholesale and retail, right? As we adopt BCE, now is a great time to kind of start thinking about how that might be. We also saw a lot of operators kind of begin to focus on the quality aspect, just like both Nicole and Guy mentioned. Investments in some of the quality related elements kind of went in while things were relatively quiet and flat. And the third thing that comes to mind is, and I've kind of had a chance to talk to many operators, even as we kind of went back into some of these webinars and conversations and events and so on, the concern about skill levels, right? I mean, many people, what is euphemistically called the Great Resignation, has not left this industry untouched either. There is a certain level of skillfulness that plays a role at the table in this entire process of wholesale, retail, everywhere in roaming departments. And I think that's a challenge that operators will have to rise to. And that's where some of these automation, the new age tools, detection of IoT using machine learning processes, just as one example of where machine learning can play a role, AI tools, you'll see increasing sophistication in the kind of platforms and tools that begin to make their presence felt at operators. That's pretty exciting as well.
Thank you, Deep. We've had another question which revolves around the idea of private 5G networks. So our audience member asks, is there an expectation in increased roaming requirements with the advent of private 5G networks, and what is the impact of that?
Okay, I can take a stab at that one if you guys like. Yeah, so part of my job is to look at the futures, and we've been looking at the private 5G networks, 5G in a suitcase, if you like, pretty much. You turn up and you have your cards and enable the network on a factory site, an airport, whatever it is. The roaming requirements of that are relatively limited, I think, in what the implication of the question. So it's just a case of that SIM which is on the private network being able to access a public network. Some of the intercarriers are starting to offer a kind of dual IMSI service for that, so that that IMSI can come out of the private network and roam onto global networks. I presume some of the domestic operators will be offering that service domestically as well. So I don't think it was somewhere that I thought originally there would be, let's have a look at that because it looks like there's rich pickings. Actually, I don't think there's that much going to come out of it. That's my view today anyway.
Yeah, I actually agree with Guy too on that. So I think initially when I heard of private networks, I was thinking there's going to be a lot of roaming requirements and that everyone was going to want to roam on these private networks. But I think we have to look at what private networks really are and what they're doing. And I think there's a lot of people that just want to deploy them for manufacturing companies and stuff like that, so that all their automated machinery will be connected to that private network, and they may not want anyone to be roaming on that network. So I think when you start looking at the use cases for private networks, you can apply the roaming standards that we have if necessary, but I think people can deploy these 5G private networks without having any roaming, and I think that's a really interesting kind of world.
Yeah, I think there'll be, again, in broad agreement with what both Nicole and Guy said, but I think there is going to be a role for, if you look at the network homogeneously as a single unitary monolith, then yes, the use cases don't necessarily immediately jump out as being in need of roaming support. But as you kind of get down and say, okay, I could slice it, I could have certain devices roam back and forth, I think there will be an emerging need that we'll see. It's not happening right now. I think it's still an evolution. It will happen in the coming few years. But there is one other element that could have a role there. That's regulation, right? What domestic roaming is not really natural in every market. So how the regulators kind of allow, what kind of IMCs might play a role in enabling that roaming, if you will. Guy talked about dual IMC. It's kind of been in force for roaming enablement for years now, for decades, if you will. What role they will play in the context of private public wireless networks in the same country. I think that's what the regulators think about it is got to be another kind of factor, if you will, with this model.
Thank you very much, everyone. We've had another question. What impact will Volte technology have on the roaming market, and how can operators best prepare?
I think the most important thing is that people don't delay their Volte launches. I think that a lot of people just have gone straight from 3G, or have thought they could go straight from 3G to 5G. And I think it's really important, especially before, when you do 5G non-standalone, you still need that underlying Volte network and that Volte functionality, and you need that for fallback. So I think it's really important that people still move forward with their Volte launches and that they continue pushing those.
I think it's been really interesting. We took a look at the impacts of Volte on operators in general because of the 2G, 3G shutdown, and talked to a lot of operators about it. And it's actually not simple for an operator to launch Volte roaming. Many operators, particularly with devices that were bought not in their own shops, have no control over those devices and don't even know whether the Volte is switched on or not. And hence they have to look for other ways of actually managing that transition. Many of the operator support systems, billing systems maybe are not able to deal with Volte, so they have to do, and it's just a case of upgrading the whole end-to-end stream to cater for Volte, and also the management of the devices. So it's not a simple one, and this has all been brought to the fore by the AT&T shutdown and soon the T-Mobile one. So I think it will be solved, and it has to be solved because well, you can use a gateway or you bring yourself up on Volte, but most operators are bringing up Volte now.
Yeah, I agree. I think a guy talked about it. What I think is essentially the heart of it, like a lot of the iniquity, disparity, if you will, between the network levels, devices, how subscribers interact with the devices, if they are going to be able to make changes on their own, the education that is required. And on the operator side, the whole operational procedures around getting Volte roaming up and running. I mean, there's still several networks out there, and if we kind of look at the long tail of networks that still don't really have an IMS core, right? That's a kind of solve more elemental problems like that before you kind of jump into Volte. But absolutely, I think Nicole hit the nail on the head. You do not want to delay this any further. You need to start thinking about it, planning for it, budgeting for it, and so on in the roaming context as well. And there is a complexity around getting it up and running, testing it, and kind of turning it on, if you will. That will take time to wrestle down.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one more question today. Our last question is, how can vendors best support operators in the evolution of roaming settlement in terms of tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3?
Go ahead.
Go on, Nicole, you go first.
I think it's most important just to listen to the operators of what they're going to want. I think for the first time, you're going to start seeing what I mentioned earlier of these a la carte services. And I think what the tier ones are going to want is a lot different than what the tier 2 and tier 3 are going to want. I think that the tier ones may only want a piece of certain services. They may store all the records. They may create all their BC reports and records themselves and store them locally. But some of the smaller operators don't have the big IT departments. And as we talked about, BC is very complex. So they may need the vendors to help them out a little bit more and offer kind of like a consulting type service for these types of things. But I think the most important thing is to have flexible options, and also just to be listening to the customers and hearing like all these different flavors of these services that they're going to want.
Yeah, I agree. So tier ones, as you say, some of them are doing their own BCE services. It means that the vendors have to be flexible and plug into whatever level of BCE is done. I think also what operators are looking for is continuity from the vendors. So, for example, if we're offering a clearing service and we bring BCE, they want the same reports, and those reports will either evolve towards BCE reports or they'll be in some format that's familiar. But they want to be able to have one person who can understand what's going on with their business, rather than them having to interpret two different businesses. And I think that's very important for the operators, because at the end of the day, it tends to be one service that they're doing, or one subscriber they're serving. So they do want continuity. They don't want to have to check continuity between data, all of those things. So I think that's key for us. And the flexibility that Nicole talked about, particularly with the tier ones, there's all kinds of different models emerging in the tier ones.
Yeah, I think we talked about all the pilots and the trials that have been happening, and you kind of hear many innocent questions. Do you have a BCE solution? And that's a very high level question, and then you kind of sit down, and that conversation is very important, right? Because you kind of realize that education is still where we are at in this whole process. So so being able to flexibly manage it, and I think the element that Guy talked about is very important, right? Even as you go through this disruption, you need to handhold them through what looks like familiar stuff, familiar territory. So that's going to be important, and that's going to result in some systemic disruptions, right? Process disruption is one thing, but systems managing IT elements and all that need to change. That's a level of complexity that can become pretty hairy. So once again, education, conversation, and the sooner you start planning and working towards it, better off you are. That would be my real heartfelt advice on this.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for attending our webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me via email. And thank you for participation, and we'll speak to you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.